Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I've been a trucker for over 25 years now, driving all across this country more times than I can count. I thought I'd seen it all out on the open highways, crazy drivers, dangerous weather, you name it. But nothing prepared me for the terror I experienced on an ominous stretch of Interstate 40 through rural Arkansas. It started out as a typical nighttime haul, heading west from Memphis with a full trailer load. The radio was cranked up loud, classic rock music filling the cab to keep me awake. I had my gigantic thermos of dark coffee riding shotgun still piping hot. Just me, the music, and the endless dark highway unwinding ahead through the midnight hours. Around 1 a.m. I reached eastern Arkansas, entering a long, desolate stretch of I-40 surrounded by dense pine forest on both sides. An occasional car might pass, but mostly it was just me and the 18-wheelers out at this hour. The road ahead was swallowed up in inky darkness except for my high beams cutting a path straight through. No road lights or signs of civilization, just wooded wilderness as far as the eye could see. I was about 50 miles into this lonely trek when I first saw it, a dark, humanoid figure darting across the highway maybe 100 yards ahead of me. I gasped and slammed the brakes on instinct, sending the truck into a screeching skid. But when I came to a halt, there was nothing, just empty road bathed in my headlights. No animal, person, to bray. Nothing that could explain the shadowy figure I know I saw. Unease crawled up my spine as I scanned the dark tree line for any sign of movement. The woods appeared still, but I could feel an unseen presence lurking just out of sight. Every shadow held menace in its depths. After a few tense minutes, I slowly eased back onto the gas pedal, engine rumbling as I continued my journey. But I couldn't shake the ominous feeling that had settled over me. Over the next hour, I saw 2 more fleeting apparitions dash across the asphalt before disappearing into thin air. Each time I slammed the brakes in a panic, only to find nothing there upon investigation. My heart was hammering inside my chest now. This was no ordinary wildlife encounter. The figures had clearly been upright, human-shaped, but impossibly fast, vanishing completely. Part of me wanted to pull over and get out, maybe search for footprints or other clues. But my gut warned me to stay inside, doors locked. Something sinister was lurking out there in the dark, just beyond my headlights. And I did not want to come face to face with out here alone. Resisting the urge to hit the gas and speed away, I forced myself to continue driving normally. But I was wound tight as a live wire now, pulse racing and eyes straining to see even a hint of movement. But nothing else appeared, just my own headlights reflecting back from the endless pine trunks lining the road. Finally, the first signs of civilization came into view, a brightly lit truck stop. I wheeled in hastily, needing some human company and a strong cup of coffee. As I gulped my coffee down, I started chatting with the server about my strange sightings, looking for reassurance. But instead, his face turned grim. No one knew exactly what it was, but travelers knew to avoid that dreaded strip of rural interstate, especially after midnight. I left the truck stop shaken and on edge. But a few weeks later, I ended up on 40 West again out of necessity. I tried to shrug it off, focusing on the music and the hypnotic yellow lines glowing in my headlights. Around 2 a.m. I reached the ominous stretch in Arkansas. At first, all seemed normal, just dark wilderness silhouetted by a sliver of moon above. But slowly, I began noticing shapes drifting across the road ahead of me. Strange glowing mists that disappeared as I approached. Over the next hour it intensified, shadowy beings darting just out of sight, flickering shapes morphing in the corner of my vision. The spectral activity increased until I was passing what looked like translucent people wandering along the highway, fading in and out of view. I sped up, but they kept pace, their hollow-eyed faces peering from the darkness, visible one moment and gone the next. A profound sense of dread washed over me, chill bumps breaking out across my arms. Whatever these things were, they were not of this earth. Flooring the gas pedal now, I just wanted to escape that accursed passage. But still they flickered and hovered at the edges of my headlights, as if taunting me. These were no mere ghosts or figments of an exhausted mind. Some malevolent presence was toying with me. At long last, the highway widened into 4 lanes, streetlights and truck stops appearing up ahead. Civilization. Only then did the paranormal activity cease, as if whatever dwelled there was confined to the isolated 2-lane stretch. I pulled into the first bustling truck stop, bought the largest coffee on the menu, and parked for the night. Only the rising sun could convince me it was safe to continue. As soon as I delivered my load, I called my dispatcher and told him in no uncertain terms that I would never drive that piece of 40 again. Not for any price. He grumbled but eventually agreed to keep me on northbound routes from then on. A small price to pay for peace of mind. Because I know what I witnessed out there, and it haunts me still. An ancient evil that lurks along an 80-mile strip of rural interstate. Those who claim it's perfectly safe are either lying or oblivious. But I have stared darkness in the face from the cab of my rig. I felt its hellish presence as sure as the chill in my bones. No load or payout could ever convince me to face the sinister forces that prowl that lonely asphalt by night again. I've been a trucker for a while now. I logged more miles than I can count. Seen plenty of wild stuff go down on the highways. Bad wrecks, crazy weather, you name it. But none of it prepared me for the night I suddenly found myself in a high-speed chase with a gun-wielding madman in the cab of his sports car. It started out like any other haul, heading down to Birmingham on I-20 out of Atlanta with a full load of lumber. I was driving Polly, my 1989 Kenworth. 600 horses under the hood in every gauge, purring like a kitten. It was a warm July night, clear skies overhead, and light traffic on the asphalt. Had the windows rolled down and the radio cranked up on some old Hank Williams tunes. Just me, the open road, and the gentle rumble of the diesel engine, or so I thought. Around 10:30 p.m., I was cruising along a lonely stretch of highway maybe 50 miles southwest of Atlanta. Woods lined both sides with not much civilization for miles and miles. The headlights caught the reflective eyes of deer and other critters, but otherwise the road was empty. Or so it seemed, until a pair of blinding high beams came roaring up fast behind me. At first, I figured it was just some speed demon wanting to pass, but instead of zooming by, this car got right on my tail and glued itself to my rear bumper, uncomfortably close. I tapped the brakes trying to get them to back off, but they just slid even closer, high beams blazing away in my mirrors. After a couple miles, I was getting ticked off. I stuck my hand out the window and waited for them to pass, but they never budged from my bumper. By now, I could tell it was one of them fancy European sports cars, way too much power and way too little sense. To riding punks, I figured. Just when I was contemplating tapping the brakes harder to remind them who's bigger, that car suddenly roared forward and pulled up dangerously close alongside me. I turned expecting to give a stern glare at some young joyriders. Instead, I was staring down the barrel of a pistol, clenched in the hand of a bald brute of a man. My whole body went ice cold at the sight of that gun waving around right next to my door. This was no reckless teenager. I had a full-blown highway bandit on my hands. The look on the psycho's face said he meant business and wouldn't hesitate to use that weapon. He was yelling and gesturing like a madman for me to pull over, like hell it would. I shoved the pedal down instead, and the rig's engine roared forward, pulling ahead of the car. But that fancy sports car caught up in seconds, slotting back into place near my flank. No match for 600 horses of Detroit diesel. We blew past a highway patrol car parked in the grassy median doing at least 100 miles per hour. The trooper didn't even budge, probably wondering what the heck was happening. But I sure knew. My heart was hammering now and palms slick on the wheel. Didn't seem I could escape my pursuer, but I also knew stopping would likely be the end of me. Quite the predicament at 100 plus miles per hour. Just when it couldn't seem to get worse, the maniac suddenly climbed halfway out the passenger window onto the hood of his speeding sports car. One hand was white-knuckled on the roof and the other still wielding that pistol, waving it around like a flag. He was screaming something, but I couldn't make it out at that speed. It didn't really matter. I wasn't about to pull over either way. By now I was desperate, careening down the highway being chased by a maniac. I had one option left, take him out with 40 tons of rig. I remembered an upcoming curve in the road that hugged a steep ravine on one side. As we approached, I feinted pulling over like I was conceding. He took the bait and moved alongside. That bald head stuck out the window like a 20mm cannon barrel pointing my direction. Right before the curve, I yanked the wheel hard left and clipped the front quarter panel of his Porsche. Sparks flew, a sheet metal screeched and crunched. The sports car was knocked violently off course, spinning and smoking as it disappeared over the edge out of sight. I kept the rig floored and didn't look back. A few miles later, I took the first exit ramp I saw and pulled into a truck stop, brakes protesting as I came to an abrupt halt by the pumps. My hands were shaking worse than a junkie needing a fix as I killed the engine. That had been a hell of a close call, almost too close. Who tries to run down and hijack a loaded semi at high speeds like that? The guy clearly had some mental demons haunting him, and a death wish trying to mess with these 18 wheels. I stuck around the crowded truck stop for a good while, watching the road carefully for any sign of that lunatic returning. But seems he either wrecked or got the message I wasn't pulling over. Eventually, the adrenaline wore off, and I continued the haul down to Birmingham. But I kept a close eye out the whole way there and back, pistol tucked under the seat just in case. My boss didn't believe me when I told him what happened until I showed him the dent and paint scratches on Polly's quarter panel. He said in 40 years driving himself, he ain't never seen something that wild go down. But up here on these lonely highways, trouble can find you anytime, especially with so many crazy folks behind the wheel these days. So now I keep that old pistol handy when I drive, and make sure to avoid pulling over if I get any aggressive tailgaters coming up fast. I've been hauling freight all over this country for going on 30 years now, racked up over 1 million miles behind the wheel, so I've seen it all, or so I thought. But nothing could have prepared me for the bone-chilling encounter I had several years back on a desolate stretch of the Route 40. It's an experience forever seared into my brain. It started out like any other graveyard shift haul, heading west from Nashville to Memphis with a full trailer of textiles and fabrics. I was rolling along in Betsy, my trusty truck, purring like a kitten with the windows down and Conway Twitty crooning me into a highway trance on the radio. Around 2:45 a.m. I stopped at a big patrol station just over the state border to fuel up and grab some Java. The place was dead except for the night attendant, a college kid trying not to doze off at the register. Got myself an extra large black coffee and some conversation about trucking life to perk me up before hitting the lonesome interstate again. Caffeine rushing through my veins, I cruised along singing country tunes into the night, feeling good. But about an hour later, around mile marker 125, something caught my eye, an elderly man walking slowly along the darkened shoulder up ahead. Now that might seem normal, except this was nearly 4 a.m. on an isolated rural interstate with not a building or even tree in sight, just fields stretching out empty all around. Concerned for the old fella, I tapped the brakes and rumbled onto the narrow shoulder, pulling up cautious behind him. I figured I'd offer the gentleman a ride to wherever he was heading, no sense leaving him out here alone in the dead of night. I paced along slowly as I called out to him through the open passenger window. But he didn't so much as glance my way or react, just kept shuffling steadily forward, eyes fixed straight ahead. A chill ran up my spine at his lack of response. Something definitely wasn't right here. I should have just kept driving past, but instead I pulled a bit ahead of him, the headlights now illuminating his face clear as day. And what I saw next will be etched into my brain forever. The old man's eyes were pitch black, not just the pupils dilated, but the entire orb was void of color, like black marble sunk into his wrinkled face. I felt every hair stand straight up on my neck as we made direct eye contact. His empty onyx gaze seemed to stare straight through to my soul, devoid of any emotion or humanity. It was like locking eyes with death itself. After a few terrifying seconds that seemed to stretch on for eternity, he abruptly turned and shuffled off the road into the darkened fields, movement smooth and steady like a man half his age. I was paralyzed in fear and could only watch helplessly as his silhouette disappeared between the rows of overgrown corn stalks. Whatever sinister entity inhabited that husk of a man, it wasn't anything remotely natural or human, of that I was sure. I wanted to tear off in the opposite direction, but my limbs just wouldn't cooperate. Finally, I managed to throw Betsy into gear and peel out back onto the open interstate, throttling near the floorboard as I sped away. I didn't let off the gas until the bright lights of Memphis emerged on the horizon 20 miles later. Even then, I white-knuckled it to the nearest bustling truck stop to calm my rattled nerves before continuing to my delivery destination. I cautiously asked the staff and a few fellow drivers there if they'd seen or heard of a creepy old man wandering that remote stretch of 40. Most shrugged it off, but a few went ashen and refused to discuss it further, making vague references to things best left alone. Their chilling reticence only amplified my unease. I avoided the return trip on 40 that next night, too disturbed to travel those dark miles. Instead, I took the meandering state highways back, the kind lined with comforting streetlights and homes. Cost me time for sure, but it was worth it for peace of mind, because I knew now there were evil things lurking out there in the shadows that I did not care to ever glimpse again. Once home, I tried casually asking my grandpa, a religious man who drove trucks for 50 years himself, if he knew any old stories about folks with black eyes. He stared at me silent and grim for a long minute before replying some things, once seen, can't be unseen. I could tell he knew exactly what I had witnessed out there, and it terrified him too. In over 30 years on the road, I've seen plenty of bizarre and unexplainable things late at night. Phantom hitchhikers, odd lights in the sky, noises with no source. But nothing haunts me like staring into that old man's empty black gaze that night. It was so deeply unnatural and sinister, like a void where a human soul should be. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Ever since that encounter, I outright refused to drive that desolate stretch of 40 past sundown. I keep a Bible tucked in the door just in case, though I'm not sure it would do much good against something so malevolent. Call me superstitious if you want, but you didn't see what I saw. It was pure evil lurking out there in the dark, and it's seared into my brain now like a red-hot brand. Some of the old-timers say ignoring them makes them lose interest quick, but I don't want to take any chances tempting fate again. I'm just grateful I escaped our lone encounter with my sanity intact. Now I stick to safer routes where there's comfort in streetlights and civilization, even if it takes longer. A small price to pay for peace of mind. Because whatever unholy entity haunts that lonesome highway, this old trucker wants no part of it. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.